Hi, welcome to the Talk Spot. This is Marcus, and today I'm joined by Gary Wayne. Gary's been on several times, and welcome him back. Gary, thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for inviting me back, and so happy to be with you today, and looking forward to the discussion we're about to have.
Well, perfect. So one of the first things I want to ask you about is, are you up to any new projects? Are you working on any new books, or is anything new happening in that department?
Yeah, I am working slowly away at getting another book done. It's not going to be a sequel to the Genesis 6 conspiracy, but more along the prophetic line. And again, focused on the end time and the implications and trying to clarify things in that sort of aspect. Don't have any conferences lined up till the end of the year, but I do have one that's confirmed now for Atlanta with Sacred Word Publishing, and we'll be having an end time conference there where I will be speaking at and attending.
Well, great. So one of the topics I wanted to cover with you today, and I listened to an interview you did, I suppose a couple years ago, but it was about Azazel and his relationship with the Watchers. So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind maybe talking a little bit about him and what the Watchers are for people that haven't heard of them before.
Yeah, and it's a large topic, but all sort of aspects or avenues of the Watchers sort of connect back to the same type of beings, and whether or not you're speaking from an ancient alien mythos, or an Anunnaki perspective, from a Sumerian perspective, or from Egyptian perspective, the Watchers were all described as the same type of individuals. They may have a few different names here or there, but it's a group of people that provided people or gods or aliens, depending on how you want to perceive them, or fallen angels, that provided knowledge and civilization to prehistorical human beings, and also were the gods that they were worshiping. So when we talk about the Watchers, this is a topic that sort of transcends pretty much all of the different religions and most of the legends and mythologies around the world, whether or not you want to refer to them as the seven sages, the seven primordial gods, or the seven angels that were recorded in First Enoch as the leader of the Watchers. And the Watchers were at the sort of the head of this organization, and from a biblical perspective, which I tend to speak from more often, is that they were the leader of the Angelic rebellion in prehistory. And in that mix, you have an angel called Azazel, who is the leader of the Watchers, who is Satan's right-hand man, as First Enoch will paraphrase it. And biblically, we do get Watchers which are described in the book of Daniel. It's only 3 references to Watchers in the book of Daniel, and Daniel 4, but it refers to angels that come from God's throne with messages, and particularly with messages in terms of governance, which is really kind of important, because these are the Watchers that are referred to as governing the ancient world, or governing the gods of the pantheon of the various different civilizations, and also the ones who provided illicit knowledge to humankind, just as other accounts around the world talk about it. And the term Watcher is also the same individuals that are talked about in Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4, where you have the sons of God, who are angels, who are the Watchers, who went to human females to create the giants of the antediluvian world and helped create this antediluvian organizational structure that brought the whole world into rebellion and into destruction. So that's sort of a quick overview as to who the Watchers were, and different accounts around the world, but they're all seemingly referring to the same type of individuals.
So are the Watchers then, is it fair to use the term Nephilim and Watchers kind of interchangeably?
No, I wouldn't. Although Nephilim can be called watchers and are in some of the different accounts as they're referred to as like the Anunnaki and the Sumerian legends. Nephilim are, as they're recorded in Genesis 6:4, the offspring of the fallen angels. And Nephilim derives from, or giant, which is used in the King James Version, derives from the word Nephil, and the I am is the male plural. So they're the giants. The sons of God that are referred to in Genesis verses 6:1-4 are the watchers that are being referred to.
Okay. So would you primarily say our watchers, are they more of a force of evil in the world, or they were a force of evil in the world?
Well, as we understand the word watchers, it comes out of Hebrew and Aramaic as Air, as those who watch or those who are awake, just as the watchers are called watchers in First Enoch as the ones who watch. There's an order of them. Not all of them, though, rebelled. So only some of the seraphim. And in my research, I bring the order of the watchers to the order of angels called the seraphim, who are the fiery serpent winged angels that ministered before God's altar and are right at the apex of the angelic order in terms of hierarchy. There's a interesting debate, which would be higher, a seraphim or cherubim. They may be similar, but certainly the archons seem to, who are the seven angels around God that's talked about in Revelation 8, seem to be part of this seraphim order. And so when we look at who the watchers are, we need to understand there's good ones, just as depicted in Daniel 4, who are still delivering messages from God. And then there's the fallen angels who rebelled and who had sex with humankind and created the laws of, or violated the laws of creation to create the giants before the flood.
So then I guess for Azazel, is he, like, what's a little bit of his backstory? I mean, was he... like, was he a powerful angel that fell, or what was a little bit of his backstory?
Yeah, he is. We only get that name out of First Enoch and other accounts in terms of a lot of information about this particular individual. But he is the one that is described as the scapegoat for the sins of the antediluvian world. He's the one who brings most of the knowledge to humankind. He's the one who teaches humankind and giants the art of war, which sort of suggests that war wasn't around before Azazel taught the arts of war, not only making the weapons, but the tactics and all the different skill sets that would go along with it. He's the one that is called the scapegoat and is the one held most accountable, as Enoch calls him, the host of the watchers, and the one who is sent to the abyss as the leader of the watchers, although there's other watchers that were sentenced to the abyss for the crimes as well. So what we understand, because he's a watcher, he would have been one of these seraphim archons that would have been very, very powerful, along with Satan, who would also, I would say, be classified partly as seraphim as well, even though in Ezekiel 28 he's talked about as being a cherubim. I actually think he's both. And the reason why I think he's both is because he's clearly described in Ezekiel 28 as being cherubim, and one who walked amongst the fiery stones, which cherubim didn't. They were the ones that sort of cover and fan the throne, just as they do with the Ark of the Covenant. And it's the seraphim who walk amongst the fiery stones. And in Revelation 12, we get a description of Satan as well, perhaps in a degraded sort of format. But he's described as a dragon and a serpent with wings is a dragon. And this, I believe, is Satan in a seraphic or seraphim form. So Azazel is the right-hand man of Satan. So he's the one that is organizing everything on earth with the rebellious angels, and all the other angels that would be listed in Enoch and other accounts would be reporting to Azazel. And in First Enoch, we get several different accounts of the hierarchy of that. You've got the seven leaders, and then you have the leader of tens, and then you've got other leaders as well that are listed. So there's quite a hierarchy of this rebellion because there were so many of them and so many different ranks of angels that would have rebelled. Now, biblically, even though we don't get the specific account of Azazel, we do get the word Azazel showing up in the Bible. And Azazel is the Hebrew word that's used on the Day of Atonement rituals in Leviticus 16 as being the scapegoat. So some English versions say scapegoat. Other English versions will actually show the word Azazel. And this is the second goat that is sacrificed on the Day of Atonement without explanation. And as I mentioned earlier, in the book of Enoch, Azazel is held as the scapegoat or the one ascribed all of the sins of the antediluvian world for having the most impact and leading the watchers to actually go to Mount Hermon and to have sex with human females to create the Nephilim. We also get an account of Azazel as it links back etymologically in the Bible from the book of Daniel in terms of end-time prophecy, where it's talking about Antichrist honoring the god of fortresses and forces and a few different applications, which goes back to a Hebrew word called ma'az, which is connected into a whole series. It's rooted back into a whole series of words that begin with AZ, and also meaning the same sort of things. And the AZ part is rooted in the words EZ for as well, as it connects back to being an extension of where Azazel comes from. So it seems like we're going to see Azazel show up in the end time as the god that Antichrist is going to honor and is likely sponsoring Azazel on his right, or Antichrist on his rise to power. And in Revelation 9, we get the account of the scorpion beasts and monsters coming out of the abyss and the fallen angels. These are the impassioned fallen angels and the worst of the angels that are locked into the abyss before the flood. And they're called Abaddon and or Apollyon. And that's a title, both one coming out of Greek, which is Apollyon, the other one, which is Abad, rooted in the Hebrew word Abad, which also means destroyer, just as Apollyon does. And what's interesting about that is that that is not an angelic name. It's a title. So typically an angelic name will end in EL, like Michael or Gabriel, and Azazel, as we're talking about here. And so when you start to link the words of Hebrew back to this title, Abad takes you back to the Greek word Abad, or to the Hebrew word Abad, from Greek Abaddon to Hebrew Abad and Abaddon, and that's used as the name for the destroyer of Jeremiah 51, who is going to destroy Babylon, which Antichrist does. So there's a strong connection here that we're not done with this individual, and he's going to be a significant part of the end time, just as the son of perdition that Antichrist is described as goes back to a series of words that includes Apollyon. And so Antichrist is called the son of perdition, and the one who once was, now is not, and comes up out of the abyss. So I think you've got an avatar effect going on with Azazel avataring Antichrist in the end time, and this is the god that forces that Antichrist is going to honor. And I think this entering of Azazel into Antichrist, Apollyon, son of perdition, will take place when Antichrist receives a mortal head wound and does not die. So I think this is the sort of the answer to how can he have a mortal head wound but not die. It's the false resurrection that Antichrist is going to use as part of his credentials to become the Messiah. So this Azazel individual, I think, is talked about in the Bible, but we just have to connect that linguistically and through etymology and rooting of Hebrew words back to Azazel and then back to what Enoch is talking about.
So there's definitely a lot to unpack from what you just said. But the one thing that kind of caught my ear was you kind of mentioned, it sounded like you kind of alluded to this notion or idea that in hell there's perhaps like something of a hierarchy. Is that true? Does such a hierarchy exist? And who are some of the other players in that? Like, who are some of the other names that are a part of that?
Well, we get a list of names in Enoch as some of the angels that would have been the ones that rebelled with Azazel. But I guess what I would say is not so much in hell that there's a hierarchy, because they're in chains and in prison awaiting to be released in the end time. So they've been captured and punished. But it doesn't include all of the angels that rebelled. It's only the impassioned ones and the ones who probably did the worst of evil that are put into the abyss. So what I would say is that there are more angels outside the abyss who are still doing evil and still working on the rebellion, where that hierarchy probably would take place, because there would be probably no communication to the ones that are put into the abyss, but other ones would sort of step up. But within the angelic order, both loyal and rebellious, there still seems to be that sort of hierarchy. So you get names like Shemyaza, who I think is the same angel as Azazel, and I think that's part of the corruption of First Enoch, that linguistically they've been split out because they literally kind of do the same things, and Shemyaza doesn't end in EL, and the whole name goes back to more of a title, as in Shem, as in the ones from heaven, and Asa, where you get that Azazel part of Azaz in the name, and there's several different versions of Shemyaza as it's spelled out in the first in the book of First Enoch. But I think they're all talking about the same angel, and they're still talking about Azazel. But you'll also have Kokiel, you'll have Sachrael, you'll have Barachiel, and several other ones that are named. In fact, there are, in the 23 names that are listed in Enoch, which I think has a correlation to the stars on the Paramount logo with the mountain, and that mountain being Mount Hermon. I think I might be wrong on the 21. It might be 21 or 23. I can't remember names that are listed there for some of the leaders of the angelic realm. And then there's more angels that are listed over and above that throughout. So there's a lot of angels, and if people want to get an understanding as to how many angels might be involved, in the New Testament, we're told that the number of angels in the angelic realm are uncountable. But specifically with a number, whether or not we can use it literally, and I think we can, it says 10,000 times 10,000, which would be 100 million. And by Revelation 12, there's 1/3 of them that would have rebelled. So either they all rebelled at the beginning, or there have been other defections throughout the age of Adam. But by the time we get into Revelation 12, which is at the midpoint of the last 7 years, there'll be a full third when it's prophesied that there's going to be a war in heaven led by Satan.
Wow. So I guess when it comes to the rebellion against God and Christ, is Satan, he's the leader of it all, right? So Azazel is, like he said, like his right-hand man. Everybody else kind of reports back to him, at least when it comes to the rebellion against Christ.
Yeah, he's the leader, and we get that all throughout the Bible, that he is the head chief evil one and adversary of God and of people who follow God. He is the one who has been reduced in stature to Satan's status, just as First Enoch will talk about Satan's in plural, and that would be probably the leaders of the watchers that support Satan, because Satan is used singularly as well as a specific individual who is their leader. And so I think all accounts sort of point in that direction. And so then the question for me always gets to be is well, if Satan isn't the name of the angel, then what was his name? And so we don't, again, get that in the English account, but I do think we get that name in the Hebrew account. And in Isaiah 14:12, where it's the famous verses where Satan wants to raise his throne up to heaven and be like God and have his own realm and not answer to God. We get the word Lucifer as the name that's used there. And Lucifer is the god of the Gnostics and the Freemasons and the secret societies. But interestingly enough, that's a Latin word that's been inserted for a Hebrew word. And again, Lucifer only shows up in King James Version translations, and you may get morning star or day star or other words used in other English translations. But Lucifer is the one that's in the King James Bible that a lot of people use. But again, that's an Italian word inserted into the English language for a Hebrew root word. And what the phrase is in Hebrew is Hail El Ben Shakar. So Hail El, son of the morning. That's where the morning star or day star translations comes from. But nowhere in there is there anything about Lucifer. But we get the name Hail El, Heylel. And again, El is typically used at the end of a name for an angel. And so I think this is as close as we get to the name. And Satan may have many names and titles before his fall. We don't get that those names are possible names and titles that he may have had, but we do get this one very odd reference in Isaiah 14:12.
Wow, I've never heard that before. I always just assumed, that his actual name before the fall was Lucifer. So you're saying it's Hail El?
Yes. Lucifer is actually the word that is used in original Latin that kind of refers to Venus, and Venus would be considered the morning star or the evening star.
Well, what does that actually mean, the morning star? I've always kind of wondered, what is that actually... what significance does that mean? Does that mean, I guess, I really don't know what that actually means.
Yeah, typically a morning star would be a star that's seen on first light at dawn or at dusk, and typically that is Venus. Looks kind of like a star on the horizon, and at different times of year it's in the morning, and different times of year and it's in the evening. And Venus is the term that Gnostics and secret societies have drafted as part of the allegory and the title for Satan, and also connected to Azazel as well, but more specifically for Satan. And so I think that's how Lucifer has come about to be inserted in there, because that's the god that the Freemasons and the Gnostics use as the name, that and the great architect of the universe. And so, but typically in most people's understanding, a morning star or day star would likely be the planet Venus.
Okay. So I want to ask another question again about the Watchers, and that, do they still exist today? And they're working directly in tandem with demons, would you say? Or are they themselves demons? They just kind of have a slightly different title? I mean, I know you said there was good Watchers, but for all intents and purposes, I mean, do they still exist to this day? And are they working kind of hand in hand with demons?
Yeah, they are working hand in hand with demons, and Satan is not only, as you take his name and his titles that's listed in the New Testament back to back to Greek in this case, is Satan not only the leader of the angels, but also the leader and prince of the demons. And so again, it's part of that sort of hierarchy. And according to Enoch, and I have a very good document on the case for demons in the New Testament being the spirits of bodiless giants. If anybody's interested, just get a hold of me through my website and I'll send that to you, or on what I was talking about earlier with connecting Azazel to Abaddon, Apollyon, and to Antichrist. I have a step-by-step document for people on that as well. So when we're looking at this whole scenario of who's involved in this rebellion. Demons are a distinct part from the fallen angels. And so the watchers, there would still be watchers that would be involved outside of the abyss that are also leading the organization of rebellion. And we know this because biblically we get told about this organizational structure with the 70 languages that are created both before and after the flood, and that they're led by the sons of God. As you take that back to Hebrew, in some English translations in Deuteronomy 8, it's going to say the sons of Israel. But if you take that back to the Masoretic text, it'll actually say the sons of God. And Israel wasn't around before the flood. So looks like another mistranslation. Even though there's 7 languages that Israel is part of and 70 leaders of Israel, as you go forward with that number, you could make that connection as well. But it's clearly talking about this ancient organizational structure that is talked about both before the flood and after the flood, and also in Psalms 82, where you have the council of the gods. These are the rulers that we were talking about with the governances, because they're still permitted to have governance over the earth until the end time is completed, just as Satan is the prince of this world and the leader of this world and has control of this world. And these council of gods that are talked about in Psalm 82 is talking about the council after the flood, that God will punish, and they will be sent to the lake of the abyss and die like men, as is talked about in Psalm 82. And these are ones that would have replaced those who went to the abyss, who were the governing archons, the governing watchers, the governing seraphim angels before the flood, who broke the laws of creation and went to the abyss. So the simple answer to your question is yes, they've always been around, and there are still ones that are out and around today. And I just thought maybe I'd throw in one other thing that, I maybe should have talked about a little bit earlier, is that when you take this word back, let's say in Egyptian history, you have the Nether gods and the Urshu gods, and both of those go back to a meaning that's called watcher. And in the Greek language, you have this word drakon. And again, drakon is the root word and drakonta, which is the root word for dragon in English. And as I mentioned, the seraphim angels were these winged serpent angels, which is an angelic dragon. And drakon and drakonta, and also into Latin as it goes into drakon, that means to watch. So this whole idea of these watchers who are watching over humankind is a constant that goes through all the different religions and histories around the world.
Definitely, yeah. That's definitely a lot of information. I wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit to maybe like a slightly different topic a little bit, and that is the idea of the guardians of the Antichrist. So this was a title of one of the chapters in your book. And I was just wondering if you can kind of elaborate a little bit on that and talk about like who these beings are and kind of like what's their purpose, and who are some of the key players in that?
Yeah, an interesting guardian is also linked with the word watcher, as in a guardian angel or a watcher angel. Both rooted into the same meanings. So in this case, as I talk about the guardians of the angels, these are the angels outside of the abyss that I'm referring to, who are supporting the ongoing Genesis 6 conspiracy, as I've coined it. And these are the bloodlines of the Nephilim, as they would say. I would say likely more bloodlines of the Rephaim from a biblical perspective, because it's the Rephaim who show up after the flood. And their name Rephaim also comes from giant, and it's used for giant in all applications in the Old Testament after the flood, as opposed to Nephilim, except for 2 times where giant is used for Nephilim in Numbers 13:33, as they're talking about the sons of Anak. But that's part of an embellished report. So I think Rephaim is referring to the giants after the flood, just as these Anakim are defined in Deuteronomy 2 as also being a Rephaim. So when we talk about bloodlines, we're talking about the descendants of the Rephaim after the flood. But as they believe from the secret societies and the polytheist side, they'll take their genealogies right back to the Nephilim, Rephaim, and fallen angels. This is the ruling class that gets established again after the flood. They're the ones who set up the elite noble class with their bloodlines. And it's a feudal system that continued, pretty much right up to our time, which seemingly is trying to be, having our world taken back to where basically the mundane humans are the ones in servitude and completely poor. And so when I talk about the guardians, then I'm also talking about the royal bloodlines and the purebloods, who are the ones that are protecting the history, or protecting their religion, protecting the genealogies, and believe that they're going to be the ones that are going to present the Antichrist to the world. And this Antichrist is going to have bloodlines, and they say they have the genealogies that go right back to prehistory to prove the pedigree of Antichrist, and will be part of the credentials that they present as Antichrist is rising to power in the last 7 years, and to full power by the 3.5 point at the abomination in the temple. And so what grows up around the purity of these bloodlines is guardians that are going to protect the bloodlines and the secret and the genealogies and the knowledge until they're ready to present. And the best example I can provide in terms of a very famous name for part of the guardians would be the Templars, who are the parents to the modern secret societies that we would know today, Freemasons and Illuminati and Jesuits and Rosicrucians and all the other secret societies that will funnel up into the hierarchy of the secret societies, with the Rosicrucians being that intersection from the lower levels of the secret societies to the purebloods above, and ultimately up to the main 13 Western families of the West, as we would understand it. And understand that there's secret societies and bloodlines that go all around the world. So when I'm talking about the guardians here, I'm talking about the Western guardians. And they are keeping 3 possible Antichrist candidates in secret all of the time, so that they can seize the opportunity to present one of these 3 to be Antichrist when the opportunity comes about. So the name that I was about to give was the Templars, and they were called the keepers of the message, the keepers of the genealogies, the keepers of the secrets to the family of Hugh de Payan, the Anjou family, Godfrey de Bouillon. These are the leaders and the founders of the Knights Templar, which were all royal bloodlines, and everybody in there was of royal bloodlines except for 2 Cistercian monks, but the Cistercians were part of this Gnostic enclave mold into Catholicism, which supported the Knights Templar in everything that they did and still continue to this day. These are part of the guardians that are protecting these bloodlines and genealogies for their opportunity, and they're supported by that hierarchy of angels and the bodiless spirits of demons as part of that organizational structure to bring this about in the end time.
So these bloodlines, what is this bloodline of? Like, who does it connect these current day people to? I mean, does this connect them to, like, are they slight descendants of like Nephilim descent people, or like what exactly are the bloodlines?
Well, the bloodlines are exactly as you've just stated is they claim their bloodlines or genealogies, and the royal families and the people within the pure blood organizations, they tend to intermarriage to keep their bloodlines pure. And the purer the level of the genealogy or the bloodline provides your position in the hierarchy of this cult and culture. And so, yes, it's about how they connect back and who has the most ennobled bloodlines and who has been intermarried or scioned in to, throughout the millennia to graft in other bloodlines to ennoble your bloodline. So the easiest one to look at today would be the Windsor family, which is the Hanover family from Germany. And of course, they all intermarry with other royal bloodlines. And when you look at World War I as an example, you had a war between, the Romanovs, czars of Russia against the Kaisers of Germany and the Habsburgs of Austria and the Windsors of England and all the various thrones. They were all cousins. They're all intermarried. These are the bloodlines that we're talking about, that they take their bloodlines back. And so when we talk about the families as people might understand them today, Plantagenet might be a name that people would remember, understand. And part of the Plantagenet is they come out of the Anjou. As I mentioned, Anjou was one of the founding members of the Knights Templar, who take their bloodlines back to the Nephilim. And the Plantagenet produces King John, who signs the Magna Carta, which there's an interesting piece of research that's out there on the internet for anybody to find that several people have looked at, that most of the presidents take their genealogies back to King John and to the Merovingians, which is the ancestors of de Bouillon, de Payon, and Anjou, the main ones that I'm talking about for the Knights Templar founding. And again, that's just how they track those genealogies back into prehistory. So Habsburg would be another famous family name, or the Lorraine. And notice you have the Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty, which was, again, that scioning and ennobling of the bloodlines that was part of the Austrian dynasty. Another name that people ought to be aware of that would be considered ennobled was the Unicorn dynasty, which is, again, a name that is used to reflect Nephilim and prehistory allegories, with this one-horned horse that supposedly was died off before the flood. And this is a horse that the Nephilim would have ridden into battle before the flood. Well, in the Bible, there's no such thing as a unicorn in terms of a horse. It's the Hebrew word rem for bull. That's why in many of the translations, other than the King James Version translation, it's going to be translated as wild bull, as opposed to unicorn. And unicorn is part of the coat of arms for the Stuart dynasty. Now, this is the most ennobled bloodline of that time, where it had scion with that kingship foundation of intermarriages, had collected the most ennobled bloodlines of that time, and they're the ones who become the kings of England. And of course, King James Stuart is part of that unicorn dynasty. Many other names that people might be aware of might be the Sinclairs. This is the St. Clair family that is also part of the founding of the Knights Templar. They're not listed amongst the original ones, but there was the battle partner of Hugh de Payon, and many of these bloodline families will intermarry with the St. Clairs. The name comes from the treaty that's signed by the French king as the Norse expropriate Normandy in, I think, 912 away from France, and that's the name of the treaty. And the descendants of Rollo are going to change their name to the St. Clairs, which is going to be transliterated into Sinclair, who are the founding members of Freemasonry in Scotland after the fall of the Templars. And also, this is where William the Conqueror, William the Norman, takes his bloodline back to, and this is the royal bloodlines out of the Norse, which takes their bloodlines back to the god Odin and Loki and that whole mythology in there. So I won't go through every bloodline, but understand these are some of the more important bloodlines that are in there, that would be all vying to present Antichrist from their bloodlines to be the one who's going to be the king over the whole world.
Are there any like American-centric bloodlines? Like, I mean, I know when people think about ruling class families, I think a lot of times they'll think of, the Rockefellers or like, I mean, especially I think the Rockefellers would be the biggest one. I mean, would that be considered one or no? Oh,
well, a wannabe bloodline, let's put it that way. I'm sure they have weak bloodlines before they get sponsored. And so let me explain this. You may be familiar with the term blue bloods. That would be more of the pure term. And you've also probably familiar with the term pseudo blue bloods. Well, the pseudo blue bloods are kind of the wannabes and the ones that are trying to intermarry over time to ennoble their bloodlines to become closer to the inner circles. So there comes a time when America is starting to rise into prominence, and there's going to be certain families that are going to be funded by a stable of agents to a family that I'm going to talk about in just a second. And so some of these families that are going to be funded and sponsored, and they suddenly become sort of the elite of the United States would be the Rockefellers as one of them. J.P. Morgan would be another one. And there are many of these families, and I document them all in my book. I won't go through all the different names, but they're all funded by the Rothschilds and their stable of agents, of bankers, to bring them into prominence and to get control and ensure they have control over the United States. And so this family is the Rothschilds. And again, the Rothschilds, they're brought in after the fall of the Templars, after 1307. And their original name is the Bauer family out of Germany. And they changed their name to the Rothschilds in 1812 once they set up the London Bank. And so what's going on here is two things, is that obviously the Bauer family are going to have some bloodlines back, but they're not considered part of the purebloods, but they need to establish the banking arm outside the Catholic Church with their own institution that will be away from the overreach of the Catholic Church. And that's what the Rothschilds do. And then they become sort of this visible arm as a lower level of the purebloods, although over the last 300 years, they've continued to marry their subsequent generations up the line, use as their agents and their visible agent to do the work of the purebloods.
There's one more topic that I also wanted to cover. This probably definitely ties into everything else that we've spoken about today, and that's this idea about the new Nimrod. So I think for a lot of people that just read the biblical account of Nimrod, I feel like they might not really understand kind of why he's there, like especially from like the biblical standpoint in Genesis. I mean, there's not really like a lot spoken about him, but obviously outside of the Bible, there's quite a bit talked about him. And even in your book, you have a chapter called The New Nimrod. So I was wondering, if you could talk a little bit about maybe who was the original Nimrod and what is this idea of a new Nimrod?
Good question. Nimrod doesn't get a whole lot of lines in the Bible. He is called the son of Cush. He is somebody that's talked about who became a mighty one, with mighty one going back to the word Gibborim. And a lot of people think that means he's a giant, but the word clearly says became Gibborim, and Gibborim is not necessarily a Nephilim. Gibborim is the same word that's used in Genesis 6:4 to describe the mighty ones, or again, different translations, you might see it as heroes of old or something to that effect, but that goes back to the word Gibborim, and it describes what the Nephilim were. But you could be a human and still be a Gibborim. You could still be a tyrant. You could be a mighty warrior. You could be a king. king. You could be a champion, which is Gibberine means. And Gibberine's used 158 times in the Old Testament, and sometimes just for strength, as with the strength of God. It's also used to describe angels, and it's also used to describe David's mighty men who weren't giants, although there's a few that may have the bloodlines that are outside the Israeli tribes that are in part of David's mighty men that you might make a case for, like Uriah, but I'm going down another rabbit hole, so I'll stop on that rabbit hole and get back to the subject. And so this is how Nimrod is described. And he is also linked to Babel, but in the verses in Genesis 10 that I'm talking about, you have to look so very close to even make a connection. And even though people know the Babel story of Genesis 11, we don't get a lot of detail about that. And one of the things you need to do is connect Nimrod with Babel. And we know that he's connected to Babel because Babel is one of the first cities that he founds as leader over the people of the plain, the people who came down from the mountain, the descendants of the 8 of Noah before they're dispersed, right? So he becomes the leader, and Babel is his first kingdom. And then you also get other names afterwards of cities that he founds. That is part of his post-Diluvian empire that he's going to influence and continue with his belief system and his rebellion, and I'll come back to that in a second. And so what we have going on here also, we have, as it's described where it's talking about Nimrod, is you have Asher that comes out of this empire, and Asher is part of the empire. So you have a connection to the biblical empires coming out of Mesopotamia, Shinar, which is a transliteration of Sumer, from Nimrod that becomes Assyria. It becomes Babylon, which is in Chaldea, which is where Nimrod was. You have the Persians. And so with the Daniel empires, you get a large component of these empires that are coming directly out of Nimrod, just as Micah talks about Assyria being the land of Nimrod. That's where that reference goes back to. So we have this figure that somehow gets control of the early post-Diluvian world, and he has like an Antichrist type sway over all of the people. And what we see as a result of his first empire, Babel, is they build a city and they build a tower. And whatever they're doing there, according to what the Bible says, if God doesn't prevent what they're doing, they'll be able to do anything that they want to do. And he disperses the language, disperses the people and changes the language. This is where Babel in Hebrew roots back to as a meaning, as a confusion of languages. So we get an archetype for Antichrist of the end time. And Babel is the imagery for the end time religion of Babylon. Just as Babel would have been in Sumer, in Shinar, and likely Eridu, as it's recorded in the Sumerian mythology, and Enmer-Akar, who builds it and literally tells the same type of story, but from a polytheist perspective. And we have an individual there that is now connected, when I make that sort of connect the dots and the rebellion, to a religion that would be opposite of God, which is part of the organizational structure that happened before the flood, is part of the end time, and also took place as part of the rebellion at Babel. So they introduced this religion. Now, when you get into the Gnostic and the secret society accounts, they look at Nimrod as the first Mason of the post-Diluvian world, understanding that they take Masonry back to Enoch's religion, Enoch's knowledge, the illicit knowledge of heaven, and back to the Nephilim and part of that organizational structure before the flood. And according to their belief system, Hermes finds the knowledge that Enoch stored in 9 vaults, stacked on top of each other underneath the pyramid, via the pillars of Lamech or Enoch, depending on which version of the Polychronicon that you're going to refer to, and takes this information, religion, and knowledge back to Nimrod and partners with them to establish this Babylon religion at Babel and the first rebellion against God, which happens within 100 years after the flood. And so this is the understanding and the knowledge that we need to have when we are going to understand the end time with the Antichrist and with the Babel religion, that is going to come out of these empires, the beast empires. In fact, the Babel woman is going to ride these empires, and the 7 empires are basically going to be Egypt, Assyria that she rides on, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and the end time empire, and then Antichrist is going to be the 8th empire as he's described. So understanding what happened in prehistory is one of the keys to understanding what's going to happen in the end time.
So for Nimrod, you said something that I really you just said something that really sounded really interesting. And you said that basically Nimrod, how many years after Noah was that rebellion? I thought you said 100.
Less than 100. Wow. 70 to 100 years as you do the genealogy. So the memory would be still there. The people who survived the flood, like Noah and Ham and Japheth and Cush and all these other people, not Cush, I'm sorry, that's the next generation. But the 8 that, were survivors on the ark would still be there because they're still one people. And yet you have this rebellion against God going on somewhere between 70 and 100 years after the flood.
So, I mean, Nimrod would have essentially been what, like the great grandson of Noah, right?
3rd generation.
Oh, so, wow.
Yeah, so you go Noah, Ham, Cush, Nimrod.
Jeez. So was Nimrod, after the Tower of Babel, he's not really, again, from the biblical standpoint, there's not really a ton of information. Is he alive at the time of Abraham, or what ends up happening to him?
Is who alive at the time of Nimrod?
Oh, sorry. Is Nimrod alive at the time of Abraham, when Abraham is born?
It's possible, because as you look at the genealogies and the age of the people, it gets shorter till you get down to Abraham, who's going to live 120 years. So there's a possibility that Nimrod was alive. And in other accounts around the world, whether it's Gnostic or it's in the Quran, or in Jewish legend, they will actually say that one of the reasons that Abraham has to leave Ur, which is in Sumer, which is in Shinar, where Nimrod was ruling, was because Nimrod was persecuting Abraham. And there's lots of legends about him being thrown in dungeons and into a dungeon of fire, and a whole bunch of different accounts on that. And that Abraham has to leave as a monotheist with this polytheist religion of the Magi and the wise men of Chaldea that most people might be aware of who are listening, is standing up against that whole status quo of Nimrod's organizational structure and state-sponsored religion, and has to leave for his own safety. So there's a good possibility that he was still around. And if you get into Genesis 14, in the War of Giants, in the War of 4 Kings against 5, when you have this Eastern alliance, you have Chedorlaomer, who is thought to, from historical records, to have rebelled against Nimrod and became the leader of that area as part of that alliance. So one might even think that Nimrod was alive even at that point when Abraham was already in the land of Canaan, except that we don't have that smoking gun verse to say so. But there's a good possibility he was still alive at that time.
Wow. Isn't it even possible, years wise, that Abraham might have even been alive Noah might have been alive at the time of Noah? I guess it's something too, because Abraham lived to be so old, and Nimrod might have lived to be so old as well.
Yeah. Well, in the Bible, we're told Noah lived 950 years, 600 years before the flood, and 350 years after the flood. But I think if my memory is right in terms of the time when Abraham is born, that gets to be about 380 years. So I think just after Noah would have died.
Wow.
But certainly as Shem would be referred to as one of the sons of Abraham, it's thought that Shem was still alive and actually may have met Shem at that time. And I think I said Cush was one of the 3 sons when that's the next generation earlier. So it was, you have Shem, you have Ham, and you have Japheth as the three sons. And so I made an error there when I think I said 4, and there's actually 3. So, but I'm just trying to make the genealogical connections there.
And you're talking about the sons of Noah as well. But definitely, I appreciate that. I mean, every time you've been on, there's so much information that's covered that there's so many questions that I have. And I mean, we could go for hours and hours, but, I definitely want to be respectful of, your time so far. And I mean, I think this is a lot of information, and this might be a good place to stop for now, but definitely I'd love to have you on again, maybe hopefully towards the end of the year, if that works for you. And how can we keep up with everything that you're doing, and how can we purchase your book? And how can we just keep up with all the news related to everything that you're doing?
Yeah, so the best way to keep up with me, and if you want like a document that I was talking about in terms of Nimrod and making all of these connections, I have that available. Just ask for it by name, or any other areas that I said that I have documents on. You can keep up with me on Facebook under Gary Wayne, and I put out a commentary about every week and a half to 2 weeks that's detailed and gets into significant detail on some of these subjects. Also on Twitter at Gary Wayne 63, and you can also get a hold of me through my website, the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6 conspiracy.com. And on that website, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of my book, so that you can get a good feel for it. And if you want to get a document or ask me a question, I have an email access on there that you can send it to me. And if you ask us a question, I will get back to you. And you can find my book also on the website if you want a signed copy. You can also get it through Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, BarnesandNoble.com. It's on some bookshelves. If it's not in your local bookstore and you want to support it, it's distributed by Bookmasters, so they can order it in for you if you want to do it that way. And it's also available in Kindle format.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you again, Gary, so much. And I look forward to talking again sometime.